Hello and thank you for joining us tonight on the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm your host, Melina Weisskopf, in for Steve Lance tonight. Here's a look at some of the top stories of today. The unemployment rate is nearing pre-pandemic lows, but business owners are still struggling to hire qualified workers. The labor force added 430,000 new jobs. Legalizing marijuana. Some states have already done it, and today lawmakers on Capitol Hill took action to legalize it on the federal level. We have the details for you. And we've reached a new milestone on our road to recovery from the CCP virus, with the lowest hospitalizations in the U.S. since the pandemic began. But the threat of false information from China continues as the country now locks down again. Joining us to discuss, Dr. and Congressman Brad Wenstrup. We'll start off our coverage tonight with updates on the economy. The labor force has added more than 430,000 new jobs in March, while the unemployment rate fell to 3.6%, nearing pre-pandemic lows.
Americans are back to work, and that's good news for millions of families who have a little more breathing room and the dignity that comes from earning a paycheck, just the dignity of having a job.
American employers have added at least 400,000 jobs for 11 straight months, and average hourly pay has climbed by over 5% over the past 12 months. But reports find small business owners are still struggling to find qualified employees.
NFIB surveys also indicate historically large numbers of small businesses are struggling to increase their workforce, despite almost half of all employers raising wages.
Meanwhile, the country is still facing the highest inflation rate in 40 years and skyrocketing gas prices. But to try to lower those gas prices, President Biden said this morning over 30 countries are joining America to release more oil into the market. And Press Secretary Jen Psaki is leaving her job at the White House. According to Axios, Psaki will leave in May and she's going to be working for MSNBC. But she's not yet made any official announcement.
I have nothing to confirm about my length of public service or planned service or anything about consideration about next plans. I'm very happy to be standing with all of you here today after it felt like a never-ending, endless time in my basement, quarantining away from my family. Believe it or not, I missed you all a lot.
And on Capitol Hill today, the House passed a bill to legalize marijuana nationwide, and it would eliminate criminal penalties for anyone who manufactures, distributes, or possesses it.
On this vote, the yeas are 220 and the nays are 204. The bill is passed.
Nearly all Republicans voted against it, but there were some who voted with Democrats. And there were 2 Democrats that voted with Republicans to stop it. Aside from legalizing the substance and clearing the records of people convicted of marijuana-related crimes, the bill would also allow the Veterans Administration to recommend medical marijuana to veterans living with post-traumatic stress disorder, plus gain revenue by authorizing a sales tax on marijuana products. A similar bill passed the House last year but stalled in the Senate, which is likely what's going to happen with this bill, unless Democrats can convince at least 10 Republicans in the Senate to join them in passing it to get it to Biden's desk. And House Speaker Nancy Pelosi calls this bill one of the most important criminal justice reform bills in recent history. But some say they're concerned about the potential implications of legalizing such a substance, especially the impact it will have on America's young people. Here to discuss why he voted no to this bill, we have Representative Bob Good. Congressman Bob Good, great to have you back on the show tonight.
Great to be with you.
So you were one of the majority of Republicans who voted against this bill earlier today to legalize marijuana, and I want to ask you about a statement that I saw from you about this. You said you're concerned that this legalization would, quote, produce a negative impact for our children and our communities. Can you explain that, please?
Yeah, the last thing we need is more people using addictive, behavior-altering recreational drugs. You think about all the crises affecting our nation, including the rise in violent crime and the fentanyl coming across our border and the massive number of overdoses, 100,000 Americans dying of overdoses last year. And what we want to do, the Democrat priority, is to respond with legalizing marijuana, which, as we know, will reduce the stigma, have more people experiment with it. It's the gateway drug, and obviously more children end up using marijuana as a result.
So there's many Americans, especially young Americans, who support this. They buy into the argument that it's helpful for, say, stress relief or other medical uses. What's your response to that? Why do you think they're so bought into this argument?
Well, again, it's a gateway drug, and it's behavior altering. And people smoke marijuana to get high. You know, you could argue, obviously people sometimes argue, well, what about the harms of alcohol? And I happen not to drink, but people don't always drink to get drunk, of course. Most people do it socially or just for moderation, what have you. People smoke marijuana to get high. And the marijuana of today is much stronger than it was, you know, when these hippies who are running Congress now, when they were back in their hippie days smoking it in college, it wasn't the strength that it is today. And it has an addictive component, it has a mind-altering component to it. And when you look at states where it has been legalized, the increase in addiction, dependency, homelessness, the problems that have come, and law enforcement will tell you that the criminals will, and the drug cartels, they will put their efforts into harder drugs and more dangerous drugs when they lose the profit incentive or the profit opportunity with marijuana. Part of what this law will do here on the federal level is to allow those who have been most impacted, where former criminals, as a result of their drug use and their involvement with the drug trade, to be those who would have the opportunity to make money off of the new legalization of marijuana, for the federal government to invest resources and funds to help them develop a legal drug operation, a legal marijuana operation, as a result of the fact that they've been impacted by the illegal drug trade in their communities.
So why do you think the House took this action now? We're talking about some of the benefits that people will reap from this. We know this will be taxed. Some Democrats argue it will help the economy. Do you think there's a reason why congressional leadership chose to bring this bill to the floor now?
Well, I do think it's terrible for the government trying to profit off, again, its citizens using a product that is harmful for them. And so to whatever extent that is the motivation for the tax revenue to be generated from it, to create a fund for the federal government to use without having to go through the appropriations process, quite frankly, I think it's a travesty. I think it's terrible for the federal government to try to profit off something that's harmful to its own citizens. I think it's a travesty. Here, there is no prohibition in this bill that, that prevents who you can distribute the drug to, quite frankly, and it doesn't prohibit the flavored vape products or the edibles that are the candy-like edibles that are attractive to young people, to youth, and to teenagers. And so it's going to again increase the use of marijuana products for younger people at an earlier age, obviously, increase youth addiction, and it's a terrible travesty for our country. Again, when we've got rising violent crime, we're being overrun at our border, we've got massive inflation, we've got so many crises that are happening in our country as a result of the policies of the Democrat administration, the Democrat majority in Congress. And their priority today is to get more people using addictive, behavior-altering drugs. Is that going to make our country better in any way? And I would submit that it won't.
Thank you for your time today, Congressman.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
And today, the Biden administration announced it's ending the Title 42 public health policy. It will take effect on May 23rd. The policy was used during the past 2 years, and it was meant to turn away illegal immigrants at the southern border to prevent the spread of the CCP virus. It went into effect under President Trump in March of 2020, and the Biden administration has extended it since then. Migrants trying to enter the U.S. have been expelled more than 1.7 million times. That's over a 2-year period. Today's decision is expected to draw more migrants to the U.S.-Mexico border. The Department of Homeland Security said this week that about 7,100 migrants were coming in daily. That's up from an average of about 5,900 a day in February. The agency has created a Southwest Border Coordinating Center to handle any dramatic increases in the coming months. COVID-19 hospitalizations in the U.S. have just reached the lowest point since the pandemic started. But daily new cases and deaths still surpass levels before the emergence of the Delta variant. Today, the Health and Human Services Department reported around 11,000 hospital admissions. That's a drop of about 15% from the previous week. According to the CDC, reported daily deaths from COVID-19 still average at about 600 a day. About 82% of Americans have received at least one dose of the vaccine. And how has this pandemic impacted young people? A new CDC study on mental health for teenagers shows heightened levels of sadness, abuse, and feelings of being threatened during the pandemic. Over a third of high school students reported poor mental health during the COVID-19 pandemic, and 44% persistently felt sad or hopeless during the past year. That's according to CDC data. More than half reported emotional or physical abuse at home by a parent. Feelings of racism were highest among Asian students, followed by Black students and students of multiple races. Teens also report what the CDC calls school connectedness. That is, schools give students a sense of belonging and being supported and cared for. Teenagers who felt connected to others at school reported lower levels of sadness and hopelessness. The CCP virus has mutated to multiple variants, and now China is locking down again due to an uptick in cases. The CCP first covered up the virus when it first broke out. To look at how we can better protect ourselves in the future, your regular host, Steve Lance, sat down with a doctor and Congressman Brad Wenstrup. They discussed the origins of the virus and broke down how the issue is being heavily politicized. Here's their discussion.
Congressman Brad Wenstrup, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Yeah, glad to be with you. Thank you.
Now, Congressman, you are co-chair of the Doctors Caucus. Happy to have your opinion here. I want to ask you, when it comes to the virus, we're seeing in the United States cases are starting to decline, which is fantastic. However, in China, we're seeing an uptick. The CCP was not honest in the initial outbreak. Right. As the world continues to open up, how critical is it to make sure that the CCP is being honest to avoid future issues?
Well, and that's the purpose of an organization like the WHO, is it's supposed to exist on behalf of humankind. We haven't seen that always play out. So it is important right now that China be honest, telling us what's going on, what they're seeing with a new variant, if you will, and an uptick with that, what's working, what's not working for them. And then how do we protect ourselves against that? Obviously, try to keep that contained right where it is, as you would do with any type of an outbreak. So we've got to be prepared as we go forward anyway. You know, we've seen the administration just talk about vaccination, vaccination, vaccination. Well, we know from the trials that vaccinated people do get COVID. They do better, and they're less likely to be hospitalized, but they still get it. We know that viruses produce variants. This isn't news to the scientific community. So how do we get ready for that? Understanding physiologically what this virus does to the body, fight the side effects that come from the virus itself or the effects of the virus itself, monoclonal antibodies, etc. So we've really got to be focusing on treatments as much as anything else. You know, I'm for the vaccine. I got vaccinated, but I also think we should be looking at people's natural immunity. I got my levels checked and it's through the roof. Why? Because I was vaccinated and I got COVID. So all these things have to come into play, and people need to be reacting more and interjecting with their doctors, not the President of the United States, who's not a physician. That's the problem I had with mandates, is you have a non-physician telling you what you need. That's more through coercion rather than persuasion on what is best for you.
Now, Congressman, you have a unique perspective given the fact you're looking at all of this through the lens of a physician and as a congressman, you know, from the political angle. How has this, from your perspective, been politicized, and what are the implications of that?
Yeah, and I'm really not sure why that came about per se, and why this was to be the only way we're going to go and, you know, turn it into this political football. This is something that should have united us as a country. You know, that this virus coming from China has now attacked our country. Let's work together on defeating it, as opposed to having situations in politics where when a vaccine's being developed and you have someone running for president and vice president saying, well, if it's under Donald Trump, I'm not going to take it, and I don't want it. What does that have to do with the science of what we're working on here?
So, Congressman, when it comes, and you touched upon it, when it comes to the origins of this virus, it's kind of a two-headed dragon, if you will, originating in China. You have the CCP covering up the virus initially, and what I mean by that is not allowing flights to travel domestically, but allowing flights to, so they knew about it. But then you also have the true fundamental origins of the virus, where it came from, a potential lab leak. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I'm doing a deep dive into all of that. And we see people that gained from grants to do gain-of-function or chimera-type research to create a super virus. Look, Fauci said in 2012, he was asked about this type of research and developing these types of viruses. He says, well, if we can develop those and then create a vaccine for them, there's nothing we can't beat. Well, that's a pretty risky business, and he was asked about that. He said, well, I think the benefits outweigh the risk. Well, that's an argument that you can have within the scientific community. And look, we know this type of research was taking place. We know that this process was developed and can take place. It's in open source studies and published articles, so it's all out there. I think, unfortunately, that we had people that are worried that if the truth were to come out and say that this was created in a lab, that would take away their livelihood. Because people was like, we can't fund these types of scientists anymore. We're not going to do this type of thing. And that would take away their livelihood. And I think that some people are afraid to admit that they were involved with this type of research and this possibly did come from a lab. And so they're trying to cover it up. And that's within the United States as well as within China. Look, there's no doubt about it. We were doing the research with China. We had American scientists. We had money flowing to the Wuhan Institute of Virology to do this type of research. For good or for bad, that can be debated, but it was taking place, and some people I think they feel they have a lot to lose.
Congressman and physician Brad Wenstrup, thank you.
Thank you.
Following high-profile prosecutions of Chinese spies in the U.S., lawmakers are urging the Biden administration to crack down on Beijing's espionage. But first, they say there's something that needs to be changed. President Biden has announced a major energy plan this week, using the Defense Production Act for clean energy and releasing a historical amount of oil from our emergency stockpile. How will this impact your gas price in the energy sector as a whole? We'll dive in. There's a redistricting tug-of-war between the two parties in New York State and Maryland. The initial maps were struck down by judges. We'll tell you why. Hello and welcome back to NTD's Capital Report. A group of senators is trying to stop the Chinese Communist Party from spying on Americans. This as high-profile espionage cases emerge and a major decision by the Biden administration comes under scrutiny. NTD's Iris Tao has more.
Countering espionage by Beijing. That's what Senator Rick Scott, along with 5 other Republican senators, say their latest legislation is trying to do.
Of sending spies to our country to steal sensitive research and trade secrets. Following
earlier discussions on China's threat, Senator Rick Scott on Thursday introduced the Protect America's Innovation and Economic Security from CCP Act. It aims to re-establish the China Initiative at the Department of Justice. The program, established in 2018, seeks to prevent spying by the Chinese Communist Party on American soil.
What the Communist Party of China is doing is they want to control our lives.
But the Biden administration ended the China Initiative in February, replacing it with what it called a broader strategy. But Senator Marco Rubio, a co-sponsor of the bill, calls it a foolish decision. He wrote on Thursday that it diverts resources from confronting the CCP, who he calls the single greatest threat to our national security.
These efforts are really just the tip of the iceberg.
The call comes amid heightened alert on the long arm of the Chinese regime. Just weeks ago, the DOJ charged 5 people with acting on behalf of Beijing to stalk, harass, and spy on Chinese dissidents in the U.S., including a congressional candidate in New York.
For decades, the Chinese Communist Party has targeted, harassed, and threatened U.S.-based Tibetans, Uyghurs, Falun Gong members, and pro-democracy activists. And now, as if that weren't offensive enough, the government of China has targeted the campaign of a candidate for Congress.
And just earlier this week, the DOJ charged another man for acting as an unregistered agent for Beijing in the United States. He's accused of enlisting others, including a U.S. law enforcement officer, to spy on and blackmail targets here specified by the communist regime. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
The Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee held a bipartisan hearing this week on domestic critical mineral supply chains. The hearing focused on sourcing critical minerals from the U.S. and American allies instead of importing them from adversarial nations like China. Committee Chairman Manchin said it was important to have President Biden's support.
In the immediate term, our concern is, of course, Russia. But I'm also extremely concerned with China as the gatekeeper of the critical minerals that we need.
Republican Senator James Lankford introduced a bipartisan bill this week to establish a secure supply chain of critical minerals in order to counter China's market dominance. President Biden this week laid out his energy goals. To lower gas prices in the short term, he's authorized the release of 1 million barrels of oil from our emergency stockpile. And for the long term, a complete transition away from fossil fuels. Here to dig into the details, we have the president of the Whaley Energy Consulting Firm, Don Whaley. Don, it's great to have you on the show today.
Well, thanks so much. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Okay, so Biden has just invoked the Defense Production Act to encourage production and processing of minerals and materials needed for clean energy products. Don, with your knowledge on this, could you tell us what does this mean, and will it help the president reach his intended goal of reducing our reliance on China for these key minerals?
It's too early to say. The problem is a number of the minerals that are part and parcel to the production of renewable assets, solar panels, lithium batteries, etc. We're not the world's dominant supplier of those. So this announcement, while it's a bold step, admittedly, for the Biden administration, I'm not sure how much substance there really is behind it. And more importantly, this is not like during World War II when we turned all our commercial production into military production. They can be done overnight. This can be a very long lead time undertaking. So it's unclear at this point exactly how effective it'll be, and more importantly, how quickly we'll see results from it.
So one reason Biden has done this is because he said that this is his long-term goal to ultimately phase out fossil fuels. Do you think that this is something that we could see happen successfully in the near future?
Not near future. I think that's been the problem. The reason we're in the situation we're in is I'm a proponent of the migration away from fossil fuels, from carbon-intensive energy sources, but we also have to be realistic about the time frame in which that can be accomplished. I think the reason we're seeing prices at the pump the way we are right now, the reason we're seeing energy prices for electricity at home, is there has been a rush to make that transition without a proper trajectory to achieve it, without shocking the American economy and without shocking the American homeowner.
Now, going back to the price at the pump, Biden, his short-term goal for kind of easing this price at the pump and lowering gas prices is yesterday he announced the historic release of our emergency stockpiled oil. Now, I want to ask you, Don, being involved in the energy sector, what kind of impact will this have on gas prices?
It's more, again, this is more symbolic than functional. We've seen that in the forward price of oil. He made the announcement yesterday. The June contract is down 0.3%. You know, it's 1 million barrels of oil a day, which is an enormous quantity of oil. But the United States consumes 19 million barrels a day, and the world consumes 97 million a day. And you can't forget that oil is a global commodity. So 1 million barrels dumped into a $97 million barrel market is not going to move the needle that far.
So what do you suggest is a more permanent fix? Energy experts have said this is a temporary fix. It will drop the price by cents at most. What would you suggest is a more permanent fix to these higher energy prices we're seeing right now?
I think we need to de-risk the oil and gas industry. This administration from day one has waged a subtle war on oil and gas exploration in the U.S. I mean, President Biden's nominee for controller of the currency went on record saying that it was their goal to bankrupt oil and gas explorers. And, you know, so the president made statements yesterday in his announcement of his energy plan that he was blaming oil and gas producers for the price spike, that they're price gouging, that they're not drilling simply because they want to see the price run up, which nothing could be further from the truth. Anybody that's familiar with the oil and gas industry knows that no business sector ever has been more successful in destroying price spikes. I mean, it's been a boom and bust industry forever. And whenever prices run up, We see upticks in exploration, upticks in production. It's not safe to do that though right now because you don't know what sort of regulatory barricade is coming around the corner. And so why would you invest those dollars in an unstable regulatory environment that's been created by this administration?
Thank you so much for joining us on the show, Don. It was great to hear from you.
My pleasure. Good being here. Thank you.
A New York judge has ordered state lawmakers to redraw congressional and legislative maps. The judge struck down maps drawn by the state's Democratic majority, calling them unconstitutional. The acting state Supreme Court judge ordered lawmakers to draw new bipartisanly supported maps by April 11th. The Democratic-controlled legislature drew the initial maps, and Governor Kathy Hochul, also a Democrat, approved them. Meanwhile, in Maryland, the Democrat-controlled State General Assembly approved a new congressional map on Wednesday. This comes just 5 days after a judge struck down their previous map. The judge said the old map was unconstitutional because it diluted Republican votes. Maryland Republican lawmakers are still saying that the new map gives Democrats an advantage over the state's GOP. And that's all we have for you tonight on the Capitol Report. Thank you for tuning in. From Washington, D.C., I'm Alina Weiskup, and we'll see you next time.